Welcome to the second time of our lecture series. Today we have the presentation from Thomas Mandl. He studied information science and German studies at the University of Regensburg and gained his doctorate at the University of Hildesheim. In 2006, he completed his habilitation in information science at the Faculty 3 of the University of Hildesheim, where he was appointed professor in 2010. Mandl has worked internationally as a visiting professor, including Paichai University in Daejeon, Korea, the Dhirubhai Ambani Institute of Information and Communication Technology in Gandhinagar, India, and at the Universidad Federal de Minas Gerais in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. His research focuses on human-machine interaction, information retrieval, digital humanities, and information behavior. In particular, he deals with topics such as software ergonomics, interface design, evaluation of search systems, multilingualism, and text mining. We are happy about his presentation today to AI-driven image processing for historical documentation analysis, tools and user research. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for the invitation and a very nice introduction. Thank you very much. Thank you also to Professor Langner for inviting me here. Historical document analysis, images, especially image analysis in digital humanities is still an emerging topic, I would say. Professor Langner has probably the first professorship that was really dedicated to this topic. Recently, we see new appointments in Augsburg this year, last year, and also now in Erlangen. Position is announced on that. So this is really a growing area. So CV has been shown. And my questions that I'm interested in this domain is how can we build tools that support researchers in this domain, experts in some area of research who maybe want to or should maybe work with AI, and a question that is I'm very interested in how do they use these tools, right? Often we build tools that are not used the way we think, used in different ways, throughout last projects, we became a little bit more humble, and we refined our research questions basically to why are they not using our tools? Why are our tools maybe not adequate? And what can we improve our tools bad? Do the researchers don't want to adapt? And this is probably one of the core questions. At the very end of the talk, I'll come to this. So this is a brief overview on the presentation, so you can follow the storyline here. I'll talk about our projects, our corpora first, brief introduction. Then about a few tasks that we implemented here and our challenges, some results. And then I move on to tools, our tools, but also a lot of other tools. What are they doing? What can people do with them? And where are maybe problems and issues? And as you will see, one of the last projects or the last tools that I present from our group is aimed at giving the user a lot of control over his search and his use of AI. And this part of that is evaluated, part of that, but the evaluation is also based on another project. Okay, as I said, this is this professorship was one of the first ones, I think, in Germany, the first one, I guess. But the topic is actually not so new. Since '68, there's been a first conference on visual issues in museums and digital heritage. So this has been discussed on, and then a few other timelines. Our colleague in Bamberg is also working in this domain, or has worked in this domain. And we still sometimes see two perspectives, very broadly speaking, positive and negative assessments. These tools, digital tools with their binary values, this is not good for humanities. We have much more elaborate concepts that cannot be described with binary values. And on the other hand, people that say, well, finally we get away from the expert is looking at an image and says something about it, and nobody can say what the status of this of his opinion is. This is an opinion, and finally we move on to objective measures for things like style and even beauty, and we come and we liberate humanist scholars from time-consuming operation looking for images that contain a certain object, and he can find those much more quickly and then do his research. So there's different perspectives here. We see a lot of research, but I will go over that, and I'll move on to the corpora, the collections that we used in our project so far. My first research in visual material in the digital humanities is based on children books, children and youth literature, often neglected in the humanities. And we focused on the 19th century with a group from German studies from the University of Leipzig. And 19th century is very interesting because new printing technologies were established right at the beginning, or just before 19th century. Lithography was invented, mass production was possible, books had became suddenly available to much broader social groups. And styles and genres developed for children books. Actually, if you look at some of these children books, when you go through books with children today, you will see, many of these genres they already emerged in the 19th century, not so new. And this was interesting, of course. The 19th century also created a lot of new knowledge. Here we have the train. Trains were invented and used. How did that knowledge disseminate to children? And of course, we wanted to establish digital tools for this research. Here we have a few examples. If you look into one of the books here, we see interesting already typical book to look at to disseminate knowledge about professions, typical professions. These things exist still today. And we see indexes, right, numbers in the image that point to some text, also a technique that is still used today. And here we see also the variety of styles in this collection. We have black and white, we have educational material, we have knowledge dissemination, but we also have entertaining fiction books. Interesting material, and we move into the corpora already. And we had mainly two collections that we worked with. One is called the Wegehaupt collection, one is called the Hobreker collection. And they have a few thousand books. We mainly worked with a subset of 226 books. And here we see all these are available online, and you can browse to them. They're digitized. However, unfortunately, there's not a bulk download for them, so a lot of interaction was necessary at the time to really get them on our hard drives. The Hobreker collection was collected by the couple Hobreker since the beginning of the 19th century. They collected old, at that time, historic children books, focusing on the early 19th century, and they managed to collect some 8,000 books. These are distributed now at maybe 3 places, Braunschweig, Frankfurt, and someplace else. And the TU Braunschweig has digitized many of them, so they were available for our project. And the Wegehaupt collection, Wegehaupt was the head of the State Library of the Department for Children Literature in the State Library in Berlin, Staatsbibliothek Berlin, and his predecessor, the person who followed him, was one of the person who helped us in this project, and the third person, the third department head was my, at that time, collaborator in this project, who moved now from Leipzig to Berlin. And we first we were interested in some statistical analysis to get familiar with the data, and we checked how much visual material is anyway. Now, if it's true that lithography was invented and things got cheaper and cheaper, printing images into books was cheaper, we expect that the average number of images per page would grow during the 19th century. Right, good assumption. Well, we checked, and yeah, that's true for Wegehaupt linearly, but we see our first half is very few images, very text heavy, and then we move on to 0.5 images per page, median on over all pages that we had in our collection. And however, for the Hobrecker collection, we get a quite different perspective. Why is that? Overall, more, and we see not so much change during the over time. So it's very interesting to see these patterns over time, but here we don't really see a pattern. What is going on here? And this is, of course, an interesting observation. In dialogue with the experts, found out that Wegehaupt was simply a library person. He was interested in collecting representative material. Hobrecker was a private collector who was biased to buy beautiful books. They had lots of images. He was not interested in the text-heavy stuff. So all these 8,000 books that he bought, especially the first half, he bought the beautiful ones, the ones that had images. And therefore, we get a very good biased, we can say, a biased collection. We say, yeah, this is a special case, but basically we have to keep in mind, if we talk about representativeness, this is just an example that all of these historic collections are somehow biased. What was collected, what was digitized, then maybe only the nice books were also digitized, and the other few thousand that are still sitting in shelves somewhere were not digitized. So there's always a huge bias, and of course it's good to be aware of it for our analysis. It's not good only to be aware of that for our analysis. I think also the users, the experts who are using these things later, will either be aware of that or find it strange that they have some results. So I think we also, in our tools, we need to give them somehow a feeling about these biases. Otherwise, we might not have gained their trust, right? When we come, remember this when we come to the last part. Portraits. Portraits is also another interesting domain. We collaborate here with the Herzog August Bibliothek in Wolfenbüttel, which has a huge collection, and often we find portraits in the front of books. People wrote this, but there's also, it turned out to be a genre by itself over the early modern times. And there were portrait books full of portraits of famous people. It became a collection item, and also an item that people who were wealthy enough to afford it had made a portrait of themselves. So they made a portrait in a certain style, and then they would give it to others, exchange with them, and things like that. So we see this is a very nice genre, because we always, of course, it's much more limited if you compare to the variety that we have in the children books. This is huge, and here we have the interesting, nice situation. Well, each portrait is different, of course, but we always have typically one person there, a few items. We have some clothing that shows somehow the social status, and background items, maybe not in this case. And so here we have a book, and philologus, okay, is given as a profession. Okay, yeah. So here we see elements that were included and so on. Again, a brief look at some of the portraits. I think this is from a series of professor portraits at the University of Helmstedt, the first university in Lower Saxony, made of their professors on the same style. We see with books, a certain style of clothing. And also, again, all of these you can see a lot of these things online, digitized and available. Let's look at some of the data tasks that we did with these things. I assume that most people are familiar with CNN. No need to repeat that here at this institute. Great. So basically we have systems, also visual transformers, CNNs, that bring an image into a series of numbers. And the numbers, if the images are similar, we expect the numbers to be similar. But what does similar mean at the end? For example, we created a search system, a classification of artists. We said, hey, let's take the first 10 most frequent artists from this portrait database and try to develop a classifier for that. Given the portrait, can we find the artist? And here, this is the target, and in this case, the system did not perform well. At least the same artist doesn't appear among the hits. Well, we got some results and had an analysis. Okay, visual transformer and a CNN. How did they perform on this classification task for a number of authors? This is something you see a lot of publications on, right? Artist classification since early beginnings, 2020s, even earlier. Zimmerman and so on, people publishing this. And we thought, well, the differences between the artists are quite striking, very, very big. If we look at what is it called, top one accuracy, we go from 92% or 99% for the transformer to other artists that have 70% or 87%, in this case, are much lower. The question is, what could be the reason behind this? And we compared this with a metadata analysis. When did these people, when were probably these portraits made? And we can see hard to classify, easy to classify. Well, it's a complete outlier. Well, this is an artist from the 16th century, and it seems to be easy, maybe even for non-experts, humans, to say, seems to be an old portrait, where this is something new. Oh, this might all be more similar. So this is something quite obvious in the end, right? However, if you look at many of these publications on artist classification, nobody tells us when these things were made, whether metadata is really, really strikingly different between items that we want to see. So here, a deeper look into the results and the comparison with metadata, I think is really something that is worth for any study. These are tasks that we had in mind for our children book collection, images in children books. And we were interested in what was the production type. Can we actually find a system that classifies, this is lithography, this woodcut, this is copper engraving, wood engraving, and we thought this would be a good big start for the project now, and it turned out that we still had trouble with this at the end. It wasn't such a good start at the end after all. Also reuse would have been interesting, and of course classification of objects. We started this project quite a while ago, so we didn't have a development. We had systems, but they were much less well developed than what we have today. What we do first is, of course, a segmentation between text and image, and sometimes that's already not trivial. We like our CNNs, they like rectangles, rectangular images that we find somewhere. Here in more modern books, we also find already forms that are not so easy to cut out. It could be easier. Let's look at this example. What is this? Text or image? Both, of course. And this makes the default processing steps quite challenging. You make a decision and then you say, okay, something like, is this an image? Is this something we want to look at, or is this just a ornament. These decisions, people were, when they search at the end, they will criticize it. So some people would like to have it, others not. No? So it's really basic decisions that you make that might be a problem for your system at the end when people. Also, we have nice things like this here. We have the object classifier ran over this image, and we see ape is recognized as a person. We see on one hand that's one side that's wrong. On the other hand, we could say, yeah, that's an anthropomorphic figure. It should be recognized as a person. Huh? So that is something that is not true. What's interesting about this image? This is, of course, a didactic setup, scenario where we can easily see the different forms and types of these animals here, and we would never see them like this in reality. And considering that all of these image recognition systems are trained on object recognition with realistic photographs, we see, then maybe things that are pretty sketchy, that are set up in a way, designed, might be difficult for them. And we would never find such a variety of these animals on one photograph. Another task that we wanted to, the first task that we want to engage in was copper engraving, wood engraving, or woodcut. Can we find a classifier for such a maybe simple task? Turned out to be quite difficult. We had to work with undersampling, diverse to make up for the imbalanced data set, work with try out some different pre-processing technologies to get there. And in the end, we reached, only 24% with oversampling of accuracy on this task. We said, what can we do here? What are maybe issues? And we looked at so-called CAM, scarce activation maps. Familiar? Also familiar. So technology to say which area in my image was responsible or was taken into consideration for this particular decision on this image. This is lithography because of that region. No? So element of explainable AI to make the decision transparent. And we looked at some of the results, and we found that, for example, if we look at this image, maybe hard to see, we see two people in a room, one is entering, one is sitting there. That would be a typical description of this image, right? If you're asked, can you see? And the algorithm, actually, the image mask, looks at regions that are fairly uninteresting, that you would not mention in the description. So big areas, people would just quickly sketch over, right? So here the desk, very dark desk, the background, the wall, background wall. Nobody would mention there's a background wall. Here we see the figure, the ghostly figure here, and the algorithm looks right at the edge. So it seems that in these larger spaces, the algorithm is better able to identify the fine structures that make the difference between lithography and woodcut. And sometimes when we talk to people, to experts, I cannot always distinguish these printing technologies. We talk to them. They also look into some region and say, I can't see it in the digitized format. I need to see the original. So actually, we think that there's even a similarity between how humans and the machine look at this at some level. Okay, let's move on. Object identification, also interesting problem. We would say, we want to discover how was the the railway, trains, how were they disseminated in children's books? And we run an object identifier at that time, YOLO, version 2 maybe, not as much better systems, and we simply ran it over all our books, in this case 16,000 pages, 2,000 images, and we found 4,000 objects and just made a statistical analysis, descriptive analysis. And we see, might not be so easy to find these objects like the train and to sketch dissemination of knowledge. Simply the most common object is a person, right? Maybe not so surprising if we think about it. You know, children books, people, figures in fiction and so on. And then a lot of animals, different types of animals. These are the dominating objects, right? And everything that appears less could be the interesting things, but we cannot really track the development of certain objects because they simply appear not sufficiently enough. We also check the quality, of course. How good does that work? This is just the recognition results. We didn't check all of them. Are they really correct? Are they true? And if we check the precision for different types of object, we will see that actually they're very different for types of object. Person is recognized quite well, bird is recognized much less well, and the accuracy also depends extremely on the book, because we have this variety of styles, variety of content and ways to put things. And we see some books are recognized very well and others are recognized very badly. And that doesn't always correspond with the publishing date. All of them more or less in the second half of the 18th, 19th century. Yeah, the earlier one has a lower recognition rate. For some metrics, very low. But we see giving an overall accuracy for a full data set can be quite misleading in such a environment when we have these huge differences. We also try to check fiction and non-fiction books, see the differences, maybe small ones for person or things like horses, but this would require a bit more analysis. So let's move to tools finally. This was only data analysis and looking into the deeper look into the results. What about tools for image search and analysis in image? Probably you have seen many of these tools. A very early tool that was available early was the Bavarian State Library. They implemented a similarity search before deep models. It was based on other pre-deep image analysis. Somehow find an image with metadata or through browsing, and then we could check similar images. And this is a pattern that we can still find in modern books. And if we see, okay, seems to be the same book, right? Something on the same book that we find fair enough, quite maybe useful for users. We also see a lot of these kind of tools that plot our data on certain axes that make a dimensionality reduction to 2 or 3 dimensions, and then plot this in a space where you can move around and have similar images together and non-similar ones further apart. In this tool from Yale, you can scroll in and out, so you don't see anything. You just see these probably seem to be 2 very different classes, and then you can zoom in, and these should be similar than these ones. Okay, fair enough. Zooming is not a good, always a really tricky operation, so a bit not so easy. And here we see again a few idea here. Yeah, similar search tool is been developed by the British Library by the Oxford group, Zisserman I mentioned before, and here also we have some similarity tools. Let's look at systems that rely on deep models, basically events or visual transformer, get an embedding, and then do something interesting with that. We also can implement a three-dimensional systems. We did this for our portraits, right? I have a three-dimensional space where you can move around, and if you hover over the data point, then the thumbnail will be shown. Again, not easy to navigate, but we can see there seems to be some patterns that are clusters that seem to be very similar among themselves. An interesting system was developed by I think, University of Vienna, a group in Austria, definitely, that does exactly the same thing, but just they don't resize the images. So they can scroll, say, okay, I want low, or I want to scroll in, look at the very similar ones, or I want to scroll out. Then they just, we have the same setup, just to be more dissimilar. So, okay, I want to scroll in this image, and images closer to this will come up. So one of these images might represent a larger or smaller group of other images, and that way I think it's a bit more easier to handle. Probably some of you have used this tool.
Yeah.
Okay, iArt, from the group in Hanover, and they have implemented also a visual language model, right? So you can search with text and get into the visual space and so on and so on. What here I searched for portraits of Luther, and then what works very nice is the results get clustered, and we see in this case, wow, pretty good. We see clearly that these are differently visual. And we can also, finally, something we couldn't do in the tools before, do some settings, right? We could say, I want to change my perception of similarity. Similarity, what does it actually mean? What do you, if we take the whole embedding and calculate the similarity, we only have one global perspective on similarity. However, that can sometimes is not sufficient. If the researcher is not satisfied with this perspective of similarity, or he looks at another dimension, the tool is useless, right? So here, first approach is, I can change something. What can I change? I don't know. I can set some weights. I think two different embeddings. I can select a different embedding. So now, for example, I'm more interested in these things in the background or in clothing. What do I have to set? No idea.
Well, the other one is for style, that much I can say.
For style.
Okay. The other one I don't remember.
Yeah. But if I'm interested, for example, in a detail like clothing or hairstyle, I have no idea what I have to do. Style, again, what does it mean? What the picture? So that's also a bit tricky and not really helpful. What do we have here? Similar. This is the images AI. Probably also familiar. Okay. We're looking at the same advanced systems here by Oma, and yes, exactly, Professor Bell. Again, great tool. They use a clip embedding, so visual language model again, and similar images get similar embeddings, and then they are found by the system, probably some cosine similarity, whatever. I select an image. Now we have the image as input, also very useful, but we have that also in the State Library of Bavaria, and we find stuff. Now again, maybe I'm not all of these whatever I'm not happy with. I want images that have this kind of design here, around and have some sort of color wheel, some three-dimensional setup. I'm not interested in these ones. What do I have to do? I can change a lot of stuff, but this is all technical terminology, right? Maybe many scholars in arts history and so on will have no idea what that means, what this embedding means, what they get out if they use a different distance. Well, of course, at least they can try and try to walk around in the dark until they find something interesting. Better than nothing, but still, of course, difficult, hard to use. Okay, also the collections of real experts who say, what is in the Rijksmuseum? I have no idea. No? I need to have an idea of what is really in the collection. And just to prove that, a little bit, at least poses, that's interesting. That's already something that maybe I can understand and say, pose, maybe that's the pose of the person. Maybe that's what I'm interested in, that I can understand as a researcher. But I think we need much more control over the AI. We also developed a tool. This is our tool for the children. Search for the children, your collection, children book collection. We have a metadata search, an image search, and a object detection. So this is the metadata search. Trivial, something that the library catalog would also more or less give me. And here we have the object search. So here we have already, we can select which object are we interested in. Do we want to have 1 or 2 or 3 objects? And we can also search for the position. Now I can search for, in this case, 2 people, 2 persons with mid. We made a 9 column grid here over the image, and whenever the person is mid means in this area, so right in the middle, and we can find these widgets, and they are not similar at all. Now at the first look, visually similar. So these, you will not find them with any of these tools here in one place, but here we have at least already a first step in giving control to the user. Here we are. Okay, no. There we go. No, here are the 2 people now. Image object search in our collection. In the port app, we wanted to go one step further. We said, let's train different tasks for our collection and create different embeddings. For example, what are different dimensions in a portrait collection? Well, first we have an overall embedding. But then we say, well, maybe some people just want to find people who have similar faces, right? Face similarity. So we ran a face recognition algorithm and just took the embeddings of the face recognition. What else? Overall, we could also be interested in clothing, something we didn't implement yet. No? Can we identify clothing and then create an embedding just for that part of each image, which will have a different size, and then the search will be similar, close, something you could do for hairstyle and stuff like that. Also, we see that the portraits have very different frames. Some don't have a frame, some have this kind of picture frame, some have a oval frame. That could also be trained. And of course, we have metadata. We have, for example, printing technology in the metadata. So we also ran a classifier for that and said, okay, this is an embedding trained on the production type, right? Is it copper, engraving, wood engraving, or whatever the sort of. So these are all things we could run object detection, how we can do that. We haven't done this yet, and so on and so on. And from that, we create a web search interface, but also the app. What is actually the app? Different steps, where we have our different dimensions of similarity in terminology that the expert will really understand. Can be proved certainly, but this is not technological terminology. Technology, the figure, just the person, frame, and overall face and overall picture, overall impact. Then you can set your weights, how important is this dimension for you. You can set all to 0 and 1 to highest level, and then the search similarity search, the AI will work only in this dimension that you are interested in. So later I'll give also the link. You can download and install the app and try out the results. Let's look at methodological challenges and results from our user-based evaluation. We haven't done this for the portrait app yet, but these are results that come out of the tool for the children book search. First of all, of course, we want to do an expert evaluation. That's the benchmark. We can always see some students there, but they can tell us some things, but not the real research questions. And these experts are hard to find. Try to find experts for historical children book research. We found 6. That's quite a lot. And but in an overall evaluation scenario, 6 is not very many. Then we ask them, please think of a research question and then try to answer this with the tool. That never works, for whatever reason. People will just say, oh, interesting, do I try some things? But they will not say, okay, you have my paper, could I have done this with your tool? Maybe it's difficult, maybe our tool isn't really fit for this task, but that's then the interesting thing. Why is that the case? Why can't you replicate, for example, research with it? Or maybe 2 people are reluctant to say, yes, with this tool I could have done this, I could have, because they might think the tool will replace them, things like that. General fears of AI may play a role in such an evaluation as well. Then it's very hard not to find this exact question. Yes, this would be a wonderful tool, but I need this and that additional collection there, otherwise it won't work. Okay, that was the beginning of our project. We only have that collection. Sorry, evaluation will never work in that way. Negative results, or results perceived as negative, will lead to strong rejection, strong negative opinions toward the system. That's not something new. That's not something that is only true for our system, for expert system. That is actually has a technical term for that, algorithm aversion. People say, I tried it out, doesn't work well, I never use it again. Even when I talked to in the bachelor colloquium 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago about the use of AI tools for writing, I said, how do you use these AI tools for your writing, for your academic writing? Some people will say, well, I tried ChatGPT once or twice for that, doesn't work, I'll never use it again. Not a good attitude, of course, especially when these people go to the job market and have to work with tools, but that's how people react. That's a normal informational behavior. And we have to find ways to say, we have to overcome this barrier. Very difficult task. I have no answer for that. So otherwise, we'll always get very negative evaluation results for our tools if we do a really honest and serious evaluation. And results perceived as negative. This can be, I have one image in mind, and I'm thinking this other image must come then for whatever reason, whatever background. They might not even tell us. And the image doesn't show up, then okay, the tool doesn't work. We'll never use such a tool again. Yeah, this is actually what is said here. The sessions are done that, I'll try to find this and that image with your tool, something that I'm familiar with at the moment, and it doesn't show up. Maybe many other images show up that the person doesn't know about this, but yeah, that's the tricky, difficult part about this evaluations. I'll follow up now with a few detailed observations that are basically copied out of the PhD thesis of Chana Lim, who developed this tool, did the hard work of evaluating it, and we see often when people use the tool and say, yeah, that works more or less, but now I would need another filter. I would have to cluster these results based on that, or I need to separate the different years. I need a timeline also for these results. It's nice so far, but now I need something different. This is interesting. Why didn't you tell us before? We could say, but they just can't. They cannot imagine the first step. We have to show the people what is the experts what is possible. What can you do with AI tools or other image analysis tools or other DH tools? And that means very important to have the prototype as a means of communication. Our systems are basically first approaches, first ideas, and then we can show them, so, yeah, this is okay, but then I need this and that. Before that, people cannot come up with these ideas. They're not software experts. We cannot ask people, the experts in our domain, what do you want? They have no way to answer that. Most of the software knowledge of what is possible is not there for them. Yeah. So different features, filtering functions at some point in time. Even we had 7 experts, okay. And then metadata is often important. This is a nice result with your tool, and we have now nice images, but now we need a metadata filter for that. Implement that. Okay, and behavior with data also, yeah. When people are able to work with the data that they are familiar with, then they have a higher probability of accepting the tool. Right? So something that they really, really know well. And then they try to find out a single image. Not sure why they do that. Maybe also to show their expertise because they don't want to move too far away from this image or this narrow domain. Not sure, and then the systems are perceived as trustworthy and something they could work with. Okay, yeah, towards the end, I'll briefly mention a new project that we started last year that is also works with historic material. In this case, we focus on visual material, of course. Here we focus on plants. Maybe some of you use these apps to identify plants, thus on visual basis. They have an amazing capability. You put your app to some plant here on the road or on the forest or somewhere in the Amazon, and it will often give you a very good hit just on visual information. What plant is it? It is amazing because this is around 10,000 classes or more than 10,000 classes, and classification gets harder when we have more classes, as you're aware. And we were interested in how does that work for historic material. And historic material is quite diverse. We have, come back to that, we have herbaria, sorry for the German here. So plants that somebody at some point dried and pressed between 2 pages of paper. Sometimes a few hundred years ago. Herzog August Bibliothek just acquired a herbarium that was, I think, 400 years old. So the plants are not in a good shape. They have lost color. People have put all kinds of chemicals on them to keep them, maintain them, and so on. So lots of problems. There's lots of herbaria worldwide. There's also been classification experiments have been executed with them. And printed material of different from different times, old prints and in this case manuscripts with hand-drawn plants. So we're interested in how does this deep learning models that we can use on our app, of course, also on the computer for such material. And interesting thing about this plant or also this plant is, of course, even here we have a setup, right? This is a didactical setup because in reality you would never see this roots. Here it's much more clear. We have the fruit there, the fruit is cut, the fruit is even made much bigger. And again, as these systems are trained on realistic photographs, maybe they don't work well here. Actually, so far they work actually pretty well. We're quite satisfied. You can see that we put this image here in one of these apps, and yeah, I think in this case, the fourth hit was correct. Not so good. Also, not so much information. So again, huge variety of material. This is the same plant in different centuries, in different books. Over time, we see different styles, and that's what they're working. Also interesting that in some period of time, early modern times, medieval times, the important part of the plant was the leaf, because that was boiled and was maybe medicine, right? And that was interesting. Nobody was interested in the flower. I've very, very few images of flowers. That changed during Enlightenment, and so we have much more didactical setups. So we work with partially crawl data here from a few books, from nice Köhler, for example, is on medicinal plants is interesting resource, and plantillustrations.org is somehow a private initiative where they put up 10,000 of digitized pages with plant illustrations, historical plant illustrations. You see again didactical setup with different parts of the plant. Very interesting, and that is the current work. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions. So links, the promised links. If you want, we can share the slides later. That you can download the apps, read some of this, not always published, and the art evaluation can be read in the PhD thesis of Mr. Ing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I have a quick question to your material data through the flower or plant database. Just because in my interest, is the Vina Dioscurides included? Do you know that?
Which one?
Vina Dioscurides, the late antique manuscript.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't know. No, I don't know that.
Okay.
This is
just because.
Yeah.
Okay.
But quite interesting. Please send me a link. This is maybe interesting for our experts. Huh? Mm-hmm. There is a huge Herbaria data set, actually, that was quite nice in the Clayton challenge. 100,000 press plants, specifiers for that. However, only from the Amazon area. Huh? And no local plants and stuff and things we find in our local books. So that's, of course, something we have to work on.
Yeah, Göttingen has also a little collection from Georg Forster.
Okay.
His travel with Cook around the world. So he has also a little collection. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm going to ask some questions in the chat. Should I hold it up or do you want to?
Because of the recording, yeah, please. This is online questions. Mr. Langer. Yeah, okay. The portrait of Martin Luther was a good example of the different user expectation. Yes, sometimes recognizable portrait likeness, sometimes simulated details.
Read it out loud for us as well.
Okay. Yes. Sorry, I forgot. Yes, you also are not connected. So the portrait of, thank you, Mr. Langer, for the question. I will read it. The portrait of Martin Luther was a good example for the different user expectations. Sometimes a recognizable portrait likeness, sometimes the similarity in the details of hairstyle and clothing, sometimes the stylistic similarity typical of the period, etc. This is now possible with several CNNs that have been trained with different annotation and training set. Yes, I would agree. Do you plan to integrate these different models or layers into your plant port app as well? We would love to. However, funding for this project ended. We will see, maybe the PhD thesis is still ongoing. Maybe we can train one or two more models. yes, also the very interesting hint of Mr. Langer to the layers. No? We typically believed in early times lower layers have more stylistic local information, higher levels have more semantic and object identifier recognition information, and we could also run the different similarity definitions based on the layers. However, still, that's could work, but it's still a technical definition. Huh? I would prefer to have something like, as you mentioned here, trained on style and something, and more on style, hairstyle, and so on. Yes, as long as we have such annotations, we would do that. Concerning parametric aversion, gamification is a traditional way to enlarge the acceptance of these tools. Have you tried out some kinds of user monitoring by playing with the tool? Good idea, yes, definitely. Gamification could be an approach. However, also, I'm not sure whether all experts would accept the gamification approach. They would say, oh no, I'm doing serious research. Doing research on history of education. So I just want to focus on my tasks. Yeah, I still believe it could be an approach, but I haven't tried that out yet. No? The next question, the same is true with your plants. Yes, are you more interested in recognizing the plants in manuscript, in prints, or is the likeliness or dislikeliness of importance? Well, the project funding is there just to test actually the current AI models for these collections, but I think we will go beyond that. Interesting question is, of course, style, no? Likeliness, and I think I would like to try to develop a classifier for different didactical approaches, setups that we can identify over time. We are working with also people who do historic research in this domain, and this will not be very clear-cut classes. No? Might be a lot of diversity again, but I think that is something we can do. And so also another answer to this would be, yes, we are not only in really in whether the plant is recognized or not, but also in other types of classifications that we could develop there. Thank you very much for these questions. So questions from the room or from the online audience?
I have one. It's to your app, because I think it was nice that there are only a few options to balance the findings. But in general, image science questions are very diverse and also on so many interests. So I was maybe thinking on a more modular system, so you can switch. Switch depending on your question, aspects, categories. That's something you have in the mind by this project or in the PhD, Jesus?
Not really, but definitely this can only be a first step. And as soon as it comes to more diverse sets, we are happy here with our portrait. We can define the dimensions, right? Maybe something else is missing and so on, but it might be limited. However, if you just consider the children books, we wouldn't even know which dimensions to put there. And then we would need somehow a different approach of saying, okay, I select a subset, then these dimensions make sense. But currently I would say most deep learning models could not be trained on the spot, so on. And we need, as Mr. Langer pointed out, we need the notations beforehand, and we would have to know about the dimensions before. So that's a tricky question. When does that come in, and how can we create such models with more diversity and flexibility here in the dimensions? But I think it's necessary. Oh, sorry.
Is also a traditional search included, or is it just searching by band?
You can first have first you need to do text search. Text search, you can search for a Duke or something like that, or a name, and then when you find results, you go to the similarity search. Okay. Or you can upload an image. No? So the use scenario, of course, you can take a selfie and check who looks like me in this portrait. Typical usage scenario, in such things. But the usage scenario that we had in mind originally was that these portraits were collected outside of the books. They were cut out and brought together assembled in new ways. So maybe you have sit somewhere in a library, find a portrait and don't know where it comes from, or maybe it was indexed in some other book. Does it appear someplace else? So just take the app, upload it, and maybe if it's in the collection of the Herzog August Bibliothek, you will get a hit and know, this is the metadata that belongs to this portrait. So actually that was the main idea, the search of the identical portrait. But we, of course, wanted to make it much more flexible.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation and for showing us your app. I was very curious about the research questions that people thought about the books or the portraits, because you mentioned that you chose some experts, and I was thinking what kind of research questions can they do? Because I think the research questions are different from experts in the traditional way and in the digital way. So maybe that's something.
Yes. Well, actually, we want to support people in their research domain. So I think we should support traditional questions. People who have already used digital tools and so on, they might be more familiar, or they might adopt their research to the tools. Actually, that's not what we want. We want the tools to be adopted to the human desires and the human needs, and not vice versa. Oh, that's something I can do with the tool, so I'm doing research now on whatever similarity of faces or something that I'm not interested in. And the detailed questions, I don't know all of them now. They are probably in the PhD thesis, but the diversity was high. One was a researcher on fairy tales. Another one was an expert from education, who was interested in historical education. He was looking at the didactic approach that he could see in teaching scenes. So he was interested in finding teaching scenes, something that is not so easy with our tool, because we have objects, already simple object-based, but not a scene like a family scene or a teaching and learning scene. For example, how is the teaching in classroom shown? What is the model behind it? These things I remember. I don't remember any of the other research questions from heart now. Other questions? Let's see whether
maybe
questions.
But I have a question regarding to your expert group. So are these experts older, younger? Are these people who are longer in this field, or because when you said, I was thinking if we can try to use it at a traditional group of art historians at the universities, so bachelor, master students, and to see the results by these groups, because these people are closer to modern techniques than older, and also are not completely focused on the art historian.
Yes, definitely we could use such groups. We said, okay, we want to focus only on real researchers, the main target group, and check these ideas. Can they maybe think of using this or replicate some of the results that they already had? Could they imagine doing this with our tool? And I think all had at least a PhD. So the age was, 30 plus, and had worked for a few years in the domain. So real expert definition. Some were also elderly and had professorships. And there was not really, art historians were not present in this for the children research group. Mainly people working in literature, education. That's what we looked at. Actually, art historians often are not interested in this everyday culture of children books. No? It's not often considered of interest for them.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. Maybe for a little bit of context, last semester I gave a class on digital art history.
Okay.
So a lot of the open questions that you mentioned, why do they do this, what are their interests? If you would like, I could give you some insights from the class
Sure.
I had, it was from my personal research.
No.
So I did my PhD thesis on painter attribution on ethnic basis, so I'm also very familiar with that field of artist detection. And my impression, especially of digital art historians, and the one critic you mentioned in the very beginning, Anna and Oscar Kappel. Yeah, that one. I really like her work. She has very valid points in her criticism, and I think it boils down to the translation of traditional analysis parameters into algorithms, and especially that example of researchers looking for one specific image. They want to see this one specific image because it shows them that this tool also aligns with their own analysis parameters, because to them it should be obvious that those two images should be next to each other. If they are not, it makes them actually doubt if that tool is able to perform on the level that they are looking for similarity. And also some other things concern like different, like especially in this part of artistic detection, there are a lot of early works where the computer scientists are training their classificator on WikiArt, for example, and there they have the same problem that you have with your portraits. You have period style, not visual style. And this is like, for an art historian, it seems pretty obvious, and I think that's why critics such as and Oscar Kappel always say, like, the art historical research is so much more complex. What they're saying through the flower is your findings are way too obvious for what we're actually looking for. She says it quite eloquently, but I think this is basically her point that she's making when dealing with tools such as these. And I myself, and even my whole class, we have not really found a way to tackle this problem really, because I myself, I identify as archaeologist and art historian, and do have traditional questions, but I also do digital humanities, and my solution is to train my own models. Well, I know that they are trained on my data, on my parameters, they're transparent. So I would think that maybe adding more transparency layers would help art historians to approach the tools with a little bit more trust and confidence that it might answer the research questions.
Absolutely, yeah. I think transparency is the big thing that we should look at. And I said in the beginning, biases should be obvious, like we had here. Biases in the collection everywhere. The camps could be something. Where did the model look at? Is it something region that you're interested or not? Then it's obvious, it cannot detect what I'm seeing in another region. But very good observations, put in a more nice way, as maybe I said it. Maybe often tools are not adequate for a specific research question. So training an own model is definitely the absolute holy grail for this kind of things. But not everybody can do that.
Yeah, that's really where I'm also wondering how to approach these people who are neither traditional researchers nor like myself, also trained in computer science methods. How to get them, how to catch them. And sorry, I don't have an answer for that. I think this is very valuable research in that direction, and it would be very helpful if we had like these tools that we could all use without everybody creating either their own tools or just working with the traditional methods and kind of creating a common ground for that.
Yes, so maybe we need less and less annotations that somebody can do quickly. But I also observed when we worked with the humanists, let's say, not the digital humanists in the children book research, they have concepts that are not binary, that are fuzzy, and so on, that would need an own annotation in the training model. But then they look at this, and from there they move to the next concept, and the next concept, and the next concept, and we are not even finished with the first one. So this type of research, with computer science would say, they don't define their problem well. No, that's not what we can say. They have other types of concepts and concept development and chains of thoughts that we still don't cover with these tools.
And maybe that's fine. I mean, there are still art historians who can do like
Sure.
their traditional research with these high concepts. Maybe that is also something that we have to consider, that not everything can be answered by these tools, and maybe art historians should like make like this specific taxonomy of their own research. Some things might be answered with tools, and they might also be more open to approach them. If they know, okay, these are only formal questions, I can find specific types, and then I can research the higher concepts, like with the traditional research that I have.
That's some use case that is also interesting. I use this as an advanced search tool, and then I have a subset, and then I do my own research. Nice, okay, people do that, but of course I'm interested in what do they actually do. Of course, I'm not telling them to do some way, or I don't care if they work digitally or don't want to or not, but I'm interested in can we develop systems that support them better. And to know that, we have to understand the research questions better. So that's the real interesting thing. And computer science research, also IOT and so on, great tools, wonderful, but they can come from a different direction. What is technically possible? And what can we give them? And we are solving all the problems. And that's, I think, somewhere in the middle. How can we do better user research to give them tools, and then they understand what the tool can do, and we understand what, that is missing for you. So I think that's where the clash is, and that's where the interesting research can happen.
Yeah, and also very fun classes to do with students. I think we had a lot of fun looking for research questions from art history and how computer science tries to answer them. There's still this huge gap between those two parties. So I'm very curious about what will happen in the next few years.
So it's very open. Either the art historians include digital tools completely into their method set. Some might do that, some might not. There might be different groups there, and they don't need computer scientists anymore. Or digital humanities is still there, and then we still have these two groups that might approach each other or not. So we will see. But it's definitely interesting, yes. But definitely, I think what is very useful is prototype-based user research and having qualitative analysis. Really observing people working with these tools. That's the hard, but the only way where we can find out small bits of knowledge. And we have to accept that their research changes quickly, develops, and is also quite diverse.
Yes.
Probably you know that better than me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Very welcome. No?
Another question? Then we can say thank you again for your presentation.
Very welcome. Thanks for your attention.